The wind howled through the desolate northern hills as Seraphina stood at the edge of the cliff, her heart heavy with fear and uncertainty. The air smelled of pine, earth, and the faint scent of wolf, a reminder that she was far from home, far from safety. Below her, the great expanse of the rival werewolf clan's territory sprawled like an endless sea of stone and shadow, the towering walls of their fortress looming in the distance. She had arrived. Her stomach twisted as she thought of the deal her father had struck, a deal that had cost her the most precious thing she had, her freedom. In exchange for a political alliance, for peace that no one seemed to want but everyone needed, her family had sold her to the highest bidder. And the highest bidder had been a rival clan, a clan known for its ruthless alpha and its brutal customs. She had become a bargaining chip, a pawn in their dangerous game. A shudder ran down Seraphina's spine. The thought of the man she was to marry, a leader she had never met, filled her with dread. She had heard the rumors, whispers in the shadows of his cruelty, his cold demeanor, and his heartless nature. Alpha Fenris, they called him. A king in his own right, though not one who would show kindness to anyone who wasn't of his blood. A man who ruled with strength, violence, and intimidation. Her father had insisted it was for the good of their house. The alliance would strengthen their position, improve their standing among the clans. But to Seraphina, it all seemed like a betrayal. She was not a bargaining chip, not an object to be traded in exchange for power. Yet here she was, being transported across treacherous land, bound to a fate she had no say in. The carriage she rode in creaked beneath her as it rolled through the winding path. She could hear the clatter of hooves behind her, the sound of guards on horseback keeping a careful watch. They didn't speak to her, not that she expected them to. In their eyes she was little more than an asset, a woman to be passed between hands like a piece of property. The forests around her seemed endless, the trees towering like silent sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled. The deeper they traveled, the darker it became, as if the land itself knew she didn't belong. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled in her chest. The deeper she went into the rival clan's territory, the more she realized just how little control she had left. Seraphina clenched her fists in her lap, trying to push back the tears threatening to spill. She had heard tales of the brutality of rival clans, of how women were treated as little more than tools for political gain or reproduction. But even the stories couldn't prepare her for the reality that now loomed before her. She was not just some stranger passing through. She was the bride of the Alpha King. She was supposed to be the one who would bring peace, unite the clans. She was supposed to be a symbol of hope. But inside, she felt like nothing more than a prisoner. She glanced out of the window, eyes scanning the darkened forest, but there was nothing. No escape, no salvation. The wind seemed to carry whispers, voices she couldn't understand, and though the journey was long, time itself seemed to stretch on endlessly. The guards hadn't spoken much to her during the trip. Perhaps they found no need to. She was already as good as theirs, her fate sealed by her father's decisions. All she could do was ride in silence, praying for some miracle, some intervention that might allow her to escape this fate. The carriage rattled on, the sound of the wheels scraping against the rough road the only noise in the otherwise quiet night. It felt like hours passed, though she couldn't tell. But as they approached a large stone archway, the vast gates of the rival clan's fortress rising in the distance, Seraphina knew that her life as she had known it was over. She had crossed the point of no return, and soon she would meet Alpha Fenris, the man who would decide whether she would be a mere tool in his hands or something more. But even as the gates opened before her, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had been sold to the wrong man. The carriage slowed as it approached the towering walls of the rival clan's fortress, and Seraphina's heart tightened in her chest. The heavy gates made of weathered stone loomed before her like the mouth of a great beast, ready to swallow her whole. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and awe, traced the rugged battlements that crowned the fort. The fortress was not like the delicate architecture of her home. It was crude, imposing, built for defense rather than beauty, its grey stones stained with the weight of centuries of conflict. As the gates creaked open, revealing the inner courtyard, Serafina felt a chill run down her spine. The air here smelled different, sharper, heavier. The scent of wolves lingered in the wind, a reminder of the creatures that ruled this place. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing the uncertainty of the life awaiting her inside. The carriage stopped just inside the walls, and the door was pulled open by one of the guards. For a moment she hesitated, staring out at the strange faces watching her arrival. Their eyes gleamed with curiosity, their expressions cold. They were part of the rival clan, and she was a stranger here, an outsider. Serafina forced herself to step out of the carriage, her feet sinking slightly into the gravel path. Her movements were stiff, her body trembling beneath her fine gown. The silence felt suffocating, as if the very land was holding its breath. "You'll be fine," the guard beside her muttered, though his words felt hollow. "Just keep your head down. Follow the rules, and you'll be left alone." Her gaze flickered to the tall stone walls around her, feeling more trapped with every passing second. The courtyard was a stark contrast to the beauty of her own home. It was filled with soldiers, some sharpening weapons, others tending to horses, all moving with the precision of well-trained warriors. The cold stone beneath her feet seemed to absorb any warmth, leaving her with a sense of isolation. As she was escorted through the fortress, Serafina couldn't help but notice the harshness of the surroundings. The halls were dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and wood. The servants moved quickly, their faces downcast, their silence deafening. There was no laughter here, no warmth, only the quiet hum of tension and the distant growls of wolves echoing through the walls. Finally they arrived at a grand chamber at the heart of the fortress. The doors were massive, their dark wood carved with intricate designs, symbols of strength and dominance. As the doors swung open, Serafina was greeted by the presence of Alpha Fenris, the man she had heard so much about, though she had never met him until now. Fenris sat on a high carved throne at the far end of the room, his gaze sharp and calculating as it settled on her. His eyes, a piercing silver, seemed to strip away any pretense, cutting through the layers of her fear and uncertainty, as though they could see straight into her soul. His presence was overwhelming. His broad shoulders and muscular frame gave off an air of dominance, the kind that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. His expression was unreadable, his lips set in a firm line as though he had long ago stopped caring about the emotions of others. He exuded power, but there was something cold about him, something distant that made her skin crawl. Serafina stood frozen, unsure of what to do, her heart racing in her chest. She had expected to feel something. Fear, yes, but maybe also anger or resentment. Instead, she felt nothing. She had been sold to this man, to a clan she had never known, and yet facing him now, she felt like a mere shadow of herself. "Approach," Fenris commanded, his voice deep and unwavering. His tone was not unkind, but it was devoid of warmth, as though he were speaking to a subject rather than a potential mate. Serafina hesitated, then took a tentative step forward, each movement measured as though her body was unsure whether to obey or rebel. As she came closer, she could feel the intensity of his gaze on her, like a force that wrapped around her. The silence between them felt thick, as if the entire world had gone still. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. "You are here now." Fenris spoke again, his words slow, deliberate. "You belong to this clan and to me. Do not forget that." Serafina's throat tightened, her pulse racing. She nodded, though the words felt like a bitter lie on her tongue. She was no one's property, not even his, no matter what her father had promised. Fenris studied her for a long moment before nodding to the guards. "Take her to the chambers. She needs rest." Without waiting for her to respond, he turned away, as if she were nothing more than a fleeting moment in his day. Serafina swallowed hard, her fists clenched at her sides. She could feel her heart aching with the weight of her situation, but she knew that now in this moment there was no turning back. The sounds of a distant battle horn echoed through the cold air, reverberating off the fortress walls like the cry of some ancient beast. Serafina shuddered involuntarily as she sat by the window of her assigned chamber, staring out at the moonlit expanse beyond. The shadows of the towering cliffs in the distance seemed to watch her, as though the entire landscape was waiting for something, or someone. The last few hours had been a blur of strange servants, hard beds, and a quiet that felt oppressive in its silence. The rival clan's fortress was not a place of warmth or hospitality. It was a place of coldness, where even the air seemed to have a bite. But the most unsettling thing of all had been the emptiness of her surroundings, as though her arrival had made no impact, as though she were simply another object to be dealt with in a long line of dealings. She had been fed, offered rest, and then left to her thoughts, none of which brought comfort. As she gazed out of the window, the distant flicker of torches drew her attention. A procession of warriors moved toward the fortress gates, their cloaks billowing in the wind. At their head, mounted on a massive midnight black steed, rode a man whose presence seemed to shake the very ground beneath him. Even from a distance, she could feel the energy that radiated from him, the raw power that hung in the air like an electric charge. Seraphina's heart skipped a beat. The guards at the gate straightened as the man rode through, his presence commanding absolute respect. His silver eyes gleamed beneath the moonlight, and his posture was regal, his expression one of complete authority. He was a striking figure, his dark hair pulled back into a warrior's knot, his broad shoulders outlined against the stark night sky. His very presence seemed to eclipse everything around him. The Alpha King, King Dorian. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively took a step back from the window. She had heard stories about him, whispers of his unmatched strength and his iron will. He was known as a leader who would stop at nothing to protect his people, a king who commanded loyalty and fear in equal measure. But there were darker stories as well, tales of his fury, his ruthlessness when it came to those who crossed him. His name was spoken with a mixture of awe and fear, and now standing in the heart of the rival clan's fortress, Seraphina could feel the weight of that fear. His arrival was no mere coincidence. She had known something was coming, but she had not expected it to happen so soon. She had heard that the Alpha King was returning to the kingdom after months of absence. His return meant that the delicate balance of power in the northern territories was about to shift. And in that shift, Seraphina realized she might be caught between forces she could not control. The doors to her chamber opened suddenly, breaking her from her thoughts. A servant, a young woman with a face that betrayed no emotion, entered and bowed low before her. "The Alpha King has returned. You are to meet him in the Great Hall at once." Seraphina's heart raced. She knew this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to arrive so quickly. She had heard about King Dorian's strength, his power. But what had she heard about his heart? Was he the same cold, ruthless man who ruled his kingdom with an iron fist, or was there more to him than the stories said? The servant remained silent, waiting for her to speak. Seraphina nodded, her mind spinning. There was no escaping this moment. She had been sold, but in this room, in this kingdom, everything was different. This was not the life she had known. This was something else entirely. As she followed the servant through the winding halls of the fortress, the tension in the air thickened. The walls were adorned with tapestries of wolves, their eyes glowing in the flickering torchlight. The hall smelled of damp stone and ancient wood. She could hear the sounds of the Alpha King's warriors moving outside, their boots heavy on the stone floors, their voices hushed in reverence for the man who was soon to arrive. Finally, they reached the Great Hall. The doors were wide open, and inside the Alpha King stood with his back to her, his broad frame outlined against the massive fireplace that illuminated the room in a warm, flickering glow. Seraphina froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. She was not in the presence of a mere leader. She was in the presence of King Dorian, a man who had the power to take everything from her. The very thought made her feel small, insignificant, like a mere pawn in a game she had never asked to play. But when he turned to face her, their eyes met for the first time. His gaze was sharp, calculating, but there was something else there too, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. It was the same intensity she had felt the moment he had ridden into the fortress, a force that seemed to pull at her, like a tide she couldn't escape. And in that moment, As their eyes locked, Serafina knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The great hall was filled with a silence so heavy it pressed down on Serafina's chest. The fire crackled behind her, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold tension in the air. She stood there, unsure of what to do, unsure of what was expected of her. The Alpha King's gaze remained fixed on her, his eyes sharp, piercing, as though he were trying to read every secret she kept buried deep within. Dorian was a striking figure, tall, his posture straight as an iron rod, his face set in a hard expression that left no room for weakness. Yet there was something in his eyes, something dangerous and unyielding, that made Serafina feel both small and impossibly drawn to him. She could feel the weight of his stare as though it reached into the very core of her being, unraveling her thoughts one by one. "What brings you to my court, Serafina?" His voice was low, authoritative, carrying the strength of a man who was used to being obeyed. But there was no malice in his words, just the heavy expectation of someone who demanded respect. Serafina struggled to keep her composure, the weight of his gaze making her heart pound. She swallowed, the dry lump in her throat threatening to choke her. I am here as you've ordered, my king," she managed, her voice steady but fragile. Dorian didn't speak right away. He simply studied her, the silence between them thickening. Her heart beat faster, the feeling of his eyes on her like the heat of a fire. She had never been in the presence of someone who commanded such raw power. It was suffocating, yet there was something magnetic about it, something that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. "Ordered?" Dorian repeated, his lips curling into a slight calculating smile. "You misunderstand, Serafina. You are not here because I ordered it. You are here because of the choices of your family, choices that I will not forget." Serafina's pulse stuttered, her stomach turning. She wanted to speak, to defend her family, but the words caught in her throat. How could she defend a decision that had left her feeling powerless? The truth was, she felt trapped between two worlds, the world of her family's obligations and the world of this man, this Alpha King, who now held her future in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Dorian stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing in the stillness. He was close now, close enough that she could smell the earthiness of his scent, the sharpness of his presence. His body language was controlled, but there was an undeniable intensity in the way he held himself. He didn't touch her, not yet, but the space between them felt charged, as if he could reach out and take everything from her with a single motion. "Do you understand the situation you are in, Serafina?" he asked, his voice softer now, but still filled with an undercurrent of authority. "You are not just my bride. You are a symbol, a link between our people, and your loyalty must lie with me, with my kingdom." Serafina's breath caught. She wanted to argue, to scream that her loyalty could not be bought, that she would never belong to him or his kingdom, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor, afraid to look him in the eye. "I will do as you wish," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dorian seemed to consider this for a moment, his gaze flickering over her. Then he stepped back, breaking the tension that had wrapped itself around her. "I do not wish for submission, Serafina," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I wish for understanding." He turned away from her, walking to the far side of the room where a map of the kingdom was spread out on the large table. The tension in the room did not dissipate, but the immediate danger seemed to ebb, replaced by something else, something colder, something more calculated. Serafina took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself, but her mind raced. Dorian was not like Fenris. Fenris had been brutal, demanding, controlling. But Dorian, he was something else entirely. He didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. His presence alone was enough, and that terrified her. As she stood there, trying to regain some control over her emotions, the doors of the hall opened suddenly. A guard stepped inside, his face grim. "Alpha Fenris approaches, my king," the guard announced. Dorian turned, his expression unreadable. "Let him in," he said simply, his voice calm, as if the arrival of his rival meant nothing to him. Serafina's heart skipped. She had heard of Fenris's power, of how he ruled his clan with cruelty and force. Now she would be forced to face both of the men who held her fate in their hands. She could already feel the tension between them, a storm waiting to break. As the doors swung open once more, Fenris entered the room, his gaze dark and full of threat. He was every bit as imposing as the stories had painted him, his eyes gleaming with an unreadable emotion. His arrival sent a chill through the room as if the very air had shifted. Dorian and Fenris locked eyes, the silence between them thick with years of rivalry. And in that moment, Serafina understood just how much power these men held, and how little control she had over her own life. The fire in the great hall had burned low, its last embers flickering as though they too feared the tension between the two alphas. Serafina stood to the side, her pulse racing. She could feel their power even without words, two forces locked in silent battle. The air between them charged like the moment before a storm breaks. Dorian's voice was the first to cut through the silence. "You've crossed into my territory without summons, Fenris." His tone was even, but it carried a dangerous edge. "State your purpose or leave." Fenris's smirk was sharp. "Your territory?" he repeated, his words laced with mockery. "You forget, King, that the girl standing behind you was promised to me by her own family. You may wear a crown, but you have no claim over what's mine." The words struck Serafina like a slap. Mine. She hated the way he said it, as though she were property, something to be owned. Yet before she could speak, Dorian's hand tightened at his side. His eyes glinted, catching the firelight. "You should choose your words carefully, Fenris," Dorian said, his tone low and controlled. "You speak as if she's yours, yet even now, you fail to recognize what she truly is." Fenris's eyes narrowed. "And what would that be?" Dorian's gaze shifted to Serafina for the briefest of moments, and in that instant she felt something strange stir within her, something powerful, primal, and inexplicable. Her breath hitched as a heat spread through her chest, radiating outward like invisible fire. The room seemed to tilt, her vision swimming for a heartbeat before settling again. Her heart knew before her mind did. Whatever this was, it was not ordinary. "She's not yours," Dorian said at last, his voice calm but final, "because she was never meant to be. She's mine." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Fenris's expression twisted with fury, but Serafina barely heard him. The moment Dorian spoke those words, the strange feeling intensified, a pull deep inside her like a thread connecting her to him. She could feel his emotions, raw and unfiltered, as if his heart had opened to her. Anger, strength, pain, and something else. Something she dared not name. Her hands trembled. "What are you saying?" she whispered, though her voice was barely audible. Dorian turned to her then, his silver eyes locking onto hers. "You feel it, don't you?" he said softly, almost like a confession. "The bond between us. You've known it since the moment we met, even if you didn't understand it." Serafina shook her head, backing away slightly. "No, that's impossible." Her breath came fast, uneven. "I don't belong to you. I don't belong to anyone." The faintest hint of sadness crossed Dorian's face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You don't belong to me," he said quietly, "but you are bound to me. It's the law of our kind. The bond of mates cannot be broken." The word mates echoed in her mind like a thunderclap. She had heard of it before, the sacred connection between two souls destined by the moon goddess herself. It was said that the bond was eternal, that no matter how far apart they were, their souls would always find one another. But that was legend, not truth, wasn't it? Fenris's snarl shattered her thoughts. "Lies," he spat. "You expect me to believe that she is bound to you by fate?" "Convenient, isn't it, King, claiming what was never yours?" Dorian's eyes darkened. "You know the signs as well as I do. Her heart already recognizes mine. You can fight me, Fenris, but you cannot fight destiny." The growl that escaped Fenris's throat was animalistic. "Then destiny will bleed before I surrender to it." Before Dorian could answer, he turned on his heel and stormed out, his cloak whipping behind him. The heavy doors slammed shut, and the echo rang through the hall long after he was gone. Silence returned. Seraphina stood frozen, her mind reeling. She could still feel the connection pulsing faintly beneath her skin, a tether to the man now standing before her. Every heartbeat felt synchronized with his. It terrified her. Dorian's voice broke the silence. "You don't have to fear it," he said quietly. "The bond doesn't take your freedom. It only reveals the truth that was always there." Seraphina met his eyes again, and for a fleeting second, she saw not a king or an alpha, but a man who carried the same confusion she did, a man who had not chosen this any more than she had. Her lips parted, but no words came. The fire flickered between them, its light dancing across his face. And deep down, in the place where her fear and longing collided, she wondered if fate had just changed everything she thought she knew about her life. The storm outside mirrored the one inside Seraphina's heart. The fortress walls trembled under the roaring wind, and the heavy scent of rain filled the air. She sat by the narrow window, her thoughts a tangle of confusion and disbelief. The mate bond, Dorian's words still echoed in her mind, bound to me. No matter how hard she tried to deny it, the connection between them pulsed inside her like a second heartbeat, something alive and undeniable. And yet, it terrified her. Fenris hadn't spoken to her since that night. He had disappeared into the lower chambers, his fury simmering beneath the surface of every whisper that carried through the halls. The servants avoided her gaze now. She could feel their judgment, their pity. To them, she was the cursed girl who had brought conflict between two alphas, a prize in a war she had never asked to fight. When the door creaked open, she flinched. Fenris stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim torchlight. There was something different in his expression, not the wild rage she expected, but a cold, calculated calm that made her skin crawl. "You look pale," he said softly, stepping closer. "Has the mighty Alpha King's confession unsettled you so deeply?" Seraphina's eyes darted to him, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to believe." Fenris tilted his head, studying her like a wolf studying prey. "Then let me tell you the truth." He moved closer until the scent of pine and iron surrounded her. "Dorian lies. The Alpha King will say anything to claim what he desires. That's what he does, he takes." Seraphina's breath caught. "He said the bond is a trick," Fenris interrupted, his voice sharp as steel. "An illusion woven by his kind. He wants you because of what you represent, not because of who you are. You're the daughter of a noble house, the one with the bloodline that can seal his rule. Don't you see it? He's using you." His words hit her like arrows. They pierced straight through the fragile certainty she had built since Dorian's confession. She wanted to deny them, to say that Dorian's gaze, his words, his touch had felt real. But what if it wasn't? What if everything had been a calculated lie? Fenris saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes and pressed on, his tone softening. "You think I don't know him? I've watched him destroy everything he touches. The man has no heart, Seraphina. Whatever bond you feel is just his power manipulating you. He wants control over the northern clans, and you're his key." Her pulse raced. "And what do you want from me?" For the first time, Fenris smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Freedom, for both of us. Stay here with me, and I'll protect you from him. You don't belong to the king. You belong with your own kind, with the ones who see your worth." His words were tempting, like honey-coating poison. She wanted to believe him. She wanted someone, anyone, to offer her a way out. But deep down, she felt the faint tug of the bond again, the whisper that defied reason. Dorian's presence lingered in her mind even now, as though his very soul brushed against hers. Fenris reached for her hand, his touch cold. "He'll come for you soon," he murmured. "He'll twist your thoughts, make you believe in destiny. Don't let him. Promise me you won't go." Seraphina looked at him, torn between fear and suspicion. "I can't promise that," she whispered. His eyes darkened. "Then you're a fool." He released her hand abruptly and turned toward the door. "When he betrays you, remember this conversation. Remember that I tried to warn you." The door slammed behind him, leaving her alone once more. Seraphina pressed her palm to her chest, trying to steady the wild rhythm of her heart. His accusations gnawed at her, poisoning her thoughts. Was Dorian truly capable of such deception? Could the bond be a lie? But as thunder rolled through the night, she felt it again, a pulse, faint yet steady, pulling at her heart. Somewhere beyond the fortress walls, Dorian was near. She could feel his anger, his pain, and his determination. And though she didn't understand how, she knew one thing for certain. Their fates were already entwined, whether she wanted them to be or not. The night bled into dawn, and with it came the sound of horses thundering through the valley. Seraphina stood by the window, her eyes wide as the rival clan's warriors rushed to the gates. A storm of voices echoed through the courtyard, shouts, commands, the metallic clang of weapons. She didn't need anyone to tell her what was happening. Dorian had come. The air itself seemed to vibrate with his presence. She could feel it deep within her bones, the pull of the bond, the quiet thrum that told her he was near. Her heart raced, torn between dread and relief. Fenris's warning still whispered in her mind, but the thought of Dorian out there, facing the wrath of the rival clan for her sake, ignited something fierce and undeniable in her chest. The doors burst open, and two of Fenris's guards entered, their faces tight with fear. "The Alpha King is at the gate," one of them announced. "He demands entry." Fenris appeared moments later, his expression cold and controlled, though his eyes blazed with fury. "So he comes for his prize," he muttered, his voice laced with venom. "Let him in." The guards hesitated. "Alpha, if we open the gates—" "Do as I say," Fenris barked, and the guards scattered. Seraphina's pulse hammered as the heavy gates groaned open. Moments later, the courtyard filled with the dark silhouettes of Dorian's warriors. Hundreds of them, armored and silent, their presence like an unspoken threat. At their front rode Dorian himself, tall and unyielding, his silver eyes fixed on the fortress. The wind tugged at his cloak, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. When he dismounted, every movement was deliberate, controlled. He didn't speak until he stood face to face with Fenris. "You've held what's mine long enough," he said quietly. Fenris's mouth twisted. "Yours? You keep saying that word as if it means something. She's a bargaining token, King, not a possession." "Then release her," Dorian said, his tone steady, though the air around him seemed to pulse with restrained power. Fenris chuckled, a low, bitter sound. "I think I'll just hand her over. She's the key to peace, and the reason your precious bond will destroy everything you've built." Before Dorian could reply, Seraphina stepped forward. "Stop this," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I can't be the cause of more bloodshed." Both men turned toward her. Fenris's gaze hardened, but Dorian's expression softened ever so slightly. "You shouldn't have been brought here," Dorian said, his voice quieter now, edged with guilt. "I should never have allowed them to use you." Fenris scoffed. "Don't act like a savior. You're just as guilty as her family. You only came because you can't stand the idea that she chose to stay." Seraphina's eyes widened. "That's not true," she said quickly, though her voice shook. Dorian's jaw tightened. "You didn't choose this life, Seraphina. You were forced into it. But I can give you freedom." Fenris's laughter was sharp. "Freedom? From one cage to another? Tell me, King, do you really believe she'll ever be free with a bond chaining her to you?" Dorian didn't answer, but his eyes flickered with something unreadable. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "The bond doesn't chain," he said at last. "It connects. You wouldn't understand." Fenris's growl filled the air. "You talk of connection while bringing war to my gates." The two alphas stood inches apart now, their power filling the courtyard like a tangible force. Seraphina could feel it, pressing against her chest, threatening to crush her. She stepped between them, her hands trembling. "Enough," she said. "Please." Her plea broke through the tension for only a moment before Dorian's guards surrounded her. One of them spoke urgently to the king, but Seraphina couldn't hear the words. The world seemed to tilt again, and she felt a hand, warm, firm, on her arm. "Come with me," Dorian said softly. "You're not safe here." Before she could protest, he guided her toward his horse. The last thing she saw was Fenris's furious stare, his lips curling into a promise of vengeance. As Dorian lifted her into the saddle and took the reins, the bond between them surged, a wild current of energy that made her breath catch. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing. She was leaving one cage behind, only to enter another she could neither understand nor escape. And this time, her heart would decide her fate. The sound of hooves thundered beneath Seraphina as Dorian's horse galloped through the narrow forest path. The wind cut through the trees like a blade, but it couldn't quell the turbulence inside her chest. Her mind raced, torn between the terror of the life she had just left and the unknown that awaited her. She didn't know how long they had been riding, but the distant glow of Dorian's campfires now flickered in the distance, an oasis of light in the thick, dark night. She had expected to feel relief when she left the rival clan's fortress behind, but all she felt was a gnawing sense of dread. Dorian's grip on the reins was firm, but his attention remained ahead, his jaw clenched. His body radiated tension, the weight of the battle ahead heavy in his movements. Seraphina wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but the words stuck in her throat. She didn't even know where to start. Finally, as they reached the edge of the camp, Dorian slowed the horse to a stop. He dismounted with fluid grace and extended a hand to Seraphina. She hesitated only a moment before accepting, his touch steady and unyielding. He pulled her close for a brief second before turning toward his warriors, his presence commanding the attention of everyone nearby. "We move at dawn," he said, his voice low and purposeful. "We cannot allow them to track us back to the kingdom. We will take them by surprise." Seraphina looked around, the camp bustling with preparation. There were warriors sharpening weapons, others tending to their horses, all moving with practiced precision. But in the back of her mind, a persistent thought gnawed at her. Fenris wasn't just going to let her go. He would come for her, for Dorian, with everything he had. She tried to push the fear away, focusing on Dorian. He was here, keeping her safe, and that had to mean something. "I thought we were leaving the rival clan's territory," she said quietly, her voice tinged with confusion. "Why are we preparing for battle?" Dorian's eyes darkened. "Fenris will follow us," he said, his tone grim. "He may have let us go for now, but he won't stop until he has you back." Seraphina's heart dropped. "But why? Why not just let me go?" Her voice shook with frustration. "What is it about me that they want so badly?" Dorian's gaze softened, and for a moment she saw a flicker of the man behind the Alpha. "You're more than just a pawn in this game, Seraphina. You're the key to uniting the clans. Your bloodline carries power. Fenris knows that. But so do I." His jaw tightened and his expression hardened again. "If you think I'll let him take you back to that life, you're wrong." She felt the weight of his words settle over her, and her stomach twisted. What had she become in this twisted game of power? She wasn't just a woman, a daughter, a sister. She was a symbol, a piece to be used, traded, and fought over, and somehow that made her feel more trapped than ever. "You don't have to fight," she whispered, her voice filled with doubt. "We can find another way. There has to be another way." Dorian turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. "The only way is through this battle. Fenris won't stop. He thinks he can control everything, but he's wrong. I won't let him destroy what we're trying to build." The silence between them stretched, thick with the tension of the moment. The weight of the decision settled on Seraphina's shoulders, a burden she hadn't asked for. But she couldn't deny the truth in Dorian's words. The only way forward was through the conflict, through the blood that would inevitably be spilled. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice steady but laden with the weight of the world. Seraphina met his gaze, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she was ready for any of this. The battle, the bloodshed, the uncertain future that awaited them. But one thing was clear. She would follow him. Not because of duty, not because of the bond, but because she had already lost so much and she couldn't lose him too. "I'm ready," she said softly, though every word felt like it came from someone else. Dorian gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "We move at first light, get some rest while you can." But Seraphina didn't feel tired. Not with the weight of what was to come pressing on her chest. The fires around her camp flickered in the cold night air, but even their warmth couldn't chase away the chill in her heart. Fenris was coming, and there would be no escaping the storm that followed. The air was thick with anticipation as dawn broke over the rugged landscape, casting long shadows across the camp. The fire had died down to embers, but Serafina could feel the heat still lingering in her chest. The stillness of the early morning was deceiving. A storm was coming, and it wasn't one of nature's making. Dorian stood at the edge of the camp, his posture rigid as he surveyed the horizon. His warriors were already gathering, their expressions hard and focused, their weapons gleaming in the faint light. Every movement, every word, seemed to carry the weight of a decision made long ago, a decision to fight, no matter the cost. Serafina approached him slowly, her heart pounding as the ground seemed to shift beneath her. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to witness the violence that was about to unfold, but the reality of the situation settled in, and there was no turning back now. Dorian turned to her, his face grim but unwavering. "We'll face them head-on," he said, his voice low but full of resolve. "Fenris will not stop until he has you, and we cannot let him take you back into that hell." Serafina's chest tightened, the words like daggers in her heart. She had never wanted this, never asked to be at the center of a war between two powerful forces. But here she was, forced to choose between two men, between two fates. "I know you're afraid," Dorian continued, his voice softer now. "But I won't let him harm you, I swear it." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust in his promise, but the fear that had taken root in her chest was hard to shake. She didn't know what would happen once the battle began, what her role would be in the bloodshed that was to come, and she certainly didn't know if she could stand by and watch as lives were lost over her. "I don't want anyone to die because of me," Serafina said, her voice trembling. "This isn't my fight. I didn't ask for this." Dorian's eyes softened, but there was no hint of hesitation in his gaze. "You didn't ask for any of this, Serafina," he said. "But it's already been decided. You're not just a pawn in a game. You're the key. You're the reason this war is happening. And you will be the one to end it." She met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her bones. She was the key. And that meant more than just her safety. It meant the survival of the clans, the future of everything they had fought for. She had to face this, not for herself but for everyone who depended on her. Dorian reached out, his hand brushing hers for a brief moment. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her, reminding her of the bond that tied them together. She wanted to push it away, to pretend it didn't matter, but she couldn't. "Be strong, Serafina," Dorian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We will fight together." Before she could respond, a horn sounded in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of galloping hooves. Fenris was coming. Dorian's warriors moved swiftly, taking their positions, their faces hardened with determination. The air shifted, the tension palpable as the enemy approached. The ground trembled beneath Serafina's feet as she watched the rival clan's forces materialize on the horizon, a sea of armored warriors, their faces grim and unyielding. Fenris rode at the forefront, his eyes blazing with fury. He was a force of nature, a man possessed by his need for control. His gaze locked onto Serafina from across the field, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow until there was only him, the man who had once owned her, the man who now sought to claim her again. Dorian stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Prepare yourselves," he said, his voice low and commanding. "This is the battle that will decide everything." Serafina's heart raced as the sound of clashing steel rang in the air, the first blows of the battle already echoing in the distance. Her thoughts scattered as the ground shook beneath her, and she realized with a sickening clarity that there was no avoiding what was about to happen. The battle for her freedom, for her future, had already begun. The first wave of warriors collided with a deafening roar, the sound of swords striking shields, the cries of battle filling the air. Serafina's pulse quickened as the chaos unfolded before her. She couldn't look away. The fight was real, brutal, and there was no turning back. The lives of so many depended on what would happen here. And as she stood there watching the war unfold, one thought raced through her mind. How many would die for me to be free? The battle's roar faded into echoes that haunted the morning air. Smoke curled upward from the distant fields, the scent of ash and iron still heavy in Serafina's lungs. She stood on the steps of Dorian's stronghold, her hands trembling, her mind trapped somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. The fight was over, for now. But peace felt like an illusion, fragile and fleeting. Dorian entered the courtyard, his armor streaked with dirt and blood, his expression unreadable. His presence still carried the same commanding power as before, but something about him felt different, heavier, colder. His eyes met hers for only a moment before he looked away, and that single act made her heart twist painfully in her chest. He stopped near her, the silence between them stretching taut. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice low. "It's not safe yet." "I needed to see it," Serafina replied quietly, "to see what my freedom cost." Dorian's jaw clenched. "Your freedom isn't a cost. It's a right. Tell that to the men who died because of me," she said sharply, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "Tell it to the families who will never see them again." His head snapped toward her, silver eyes flashing. "Don't do that. Don't take their sacrifice and turn it into guilt. They fought for what they believed in." She swallowed hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "They fought for you, not for me." The words struck harder than she intended. Dorian flinched, just slightly, but enough for her to notice. He turned away, running a hand through his hair as if trying to control the storm inside him. "I think I wanted this war," he said bitterly. "You think I wanted to bring destruction to my own people? Everything I've done was to protect you, to protect us." Serafina stared at him, her chest tightening. "Protect us? Dorian, I don't even know what us means anymore." His gaze snapped back to her, sharp and wounded. "It means what it's always meant. You're my mate." She took a step back. "No, don't say that like it's supposed to fix everything. You talk about destiny and bonds like they make us one, but I never chose this. I never chose you." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, Dorian's face hardened, the warmth in his eyes replaced by something darker. "You think choice changes what you are?" he asked, his tone edged with quiet anger. "You can deny it all you want, Serafina, but it doesn't make it less real." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "What's real, Dorian, is that you've made every decision for me since the day we met. You took me from Fenris's camp without asking. You started a war in my name. You've decided what's best for me, and I'm the one left to live with the consequences." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Dorian looked away, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, he seemed lost, like a man realizing he'd been fighting ghosts all along. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter, almost resigned. "If I hadn't come for you, he would have broken you." Serafina's chest ached at the truth in his words, but she forced herself to stand firm. "Maybe, but at least the choice would have been mine." Her defiance sliced through the silence. Dorian's shoulders tensed, his breath sharp. "So what is this then?" he asked. "Is this your way of pushing me away? Of pretending what we have doesn't exist?" Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. "I'm not pretending, I'm surviving. And right now, I can't do that with you." Dorian's face went still. For a moment, she thought he might fight back, argue, demand she stay, but he didn't. Instead, he gave a small nod, one filled with pain, pride, and something she couldn't name. "Very well," he said finally. "If you wish to go, I won't stop you. But understand this, Serafina, no distance, no denial will break the bond between us. You can run from me, but you can't run from what you are." Her breath caught, her chest aching with the weight of his words. He turned and walked away without another glance, leaving her standing alone in the cold courtyard, her heart shattering beneath the burden of her own choices. And as the wind whispered through the empty space he left behind, Serafina realized that freedom, once gained, came at a cost greater than she had ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of silence became Serafina's only companion. The castle felt emptier without Dorian's presence, as though his absence had carved out the very heart of the place. She wandered through its stone corridors, feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. The battle had ended, but the war inside her had only begun. Everywhere she went, whispers followed her. Servants bowed their heads respectfully, but their eyes spoke of curiosity and judgment. They all knew. They knew she had rejected the Alpha King, had walked away from the man fate itself had bound her to. Some pitied her, others feared her, but no one dared to approach. At first, Serafina welcomed the solitude. It gave her room to think, to breathe. Yet as the days stretched on, she began to understand that healing wasn't found in isolation. It came through understanding of herself, her choices, and the path that had led her here. One morning, she walked beyond the castle gates into the forest beyond. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and rain. The world outside the fortress walls was quiet, peaceful. Here she could almost forget the blood that had been spilled, the battles fought in her name. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest sense of calm. She sat beneath an ancient oak, her fingers tracing the bark's rough patterns. "I never asked for any of this," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her. "But maybe I needed it." A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Talking to trees now, she turned sharply, her heart leaping. It wasn't Dorian, she knew that instantly. The man standing before her was older, his hair streaked with grey, his eyes kind but tired. He wore the crest of Dorian's house but carried himself differently, more like a scholar than a warrior. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, inclining his head slightly. "I'm Alden, the royal historian. His Majesty asked me to remain behind, to make sure you had what you needed." Serafina frowned. "He asked you to stay?" Alden smiled faintly. "The king never leaves things unfinished." His words unsettled her, stirring emotions she had tried to bury. "He shouldn't concern himself with me anymore," she said quietly. "I made my choice." "Ah," Alden murmured. "The thing about choices, Lady Serafina, is that they rarely end with the moment we make them. Their echoes tend to follow us, sometimes to remind, sometimes to teach." She sighed, lowering her gaze. "What could possibly be left for me to learn?" Alden looked at her thoughtfully. "You've been a daughter traded, a bride sold, and a queen who turned away a crown. But none of those roles define who you are. What matters now is who you choose to become when no one else is making the choices for you." His words lingered long after he left. That night, as she sat by her window watching the moon rise, Serafina thought about them again. For the first time she saw the truth in them. She had spent her entire life reacting to the decisions of others, her father's, Fenris's, even Dorian's, but now for the first time her life was her own. The bond still pulsed faintly inside her, that quiet reminder of what connected her to Dorian. It no longer hurt the way it once did, but it was there, steady, waiting. It wasn't a chain anymore. It was something different. A promise, perhaps, or a reminder of what love could be, when stripped of power and pride. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would ever see him again. But she knew she couldn't hide forever. Healing meant facing what hurt, and finding strength in the scars left behind. The next morning she rose before dawn. As the first light crept across the horizon, Serafina stood tall, her heart steady for the first time in what felt like forever. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a fleeting moment she thought she heard his voice carried within it. Not a plea, not a command, but a quiet echo of something unspoken, and for the first time she didn't run from it. The night was eerily still when the messenger arrived. The moon hung low in the sky, pale and watchful, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Serafina stood near the gates, her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders, when she heard the sound of hurried footsteps and the scent of fear carried by the wind. "My lady," the messenger gasped, bowing low. "The rival clan, they're marching toward the border. Fenris demands an audience with the king. He means to end this tonight." Serafina's pulse quickened. After all this time, after everything that had happened, Fenris still refused to let go. A strange mix of dread and inevitability settled in her chest. She had known this day would come. It was written in every decision, every sacrifice that had led them here. Before she could respond, a familiar voice echoed from behind her. "He doesn't get to demand anything." Dorian stood at the top of the steps, his silver eyes gleaming like shards of ice beneath the moonlight. He looked every bit the Alpha King, composed, commanding, and utterly unyielding. Yet beneath the authority in his voice, Seraphina could sense the storm brewing inside him. "Dorian," she said, stepping forward, "if he's coming here, it's because he won't stop until this ends. Maybe he's tired of fighting too." He shook his head. "Fenris doesn't get tired, he gets obsessed. He's not coming for peace, Seraphina. He's coming for you." She held his gaze. "Then I'll face him." His jaw tightened. "You won't go near him." "I'm not your prisoner," she said quietly, though her heart pounded with fear. "You can't protect me from everything. If this bond means anything, if you truly believe in it, then trust me enough to let me stand beside you." For a long moment Dorian said nothing. The silence stretched between them until he finally exhaled, his shoulders lowering slightly. "You'll stay within my sight," he said at last, his tone resigned. By the time they reached the borderlands, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth. Fenris waited atop a rise, his dark armor glinting faintly under the moon. His wolves stood behind him in perfect formation, disciplined, cold, lethal. "King Dorian," Fenris called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "We meet again." Dorian didn't flinch. "You should have stayed in your lands. This ends now." Fenris's smirk was cruel. "Indeed it does." His gaze shifted to Seraphina, his eyes burning with something far more dangerous than hatred. "You've caused quite the war, little dove. Was it worth it, trading one cage for another?" Seraphina's hands curled into fists. "You're the one who turned me into a bargaining piece. Don't pretend to be the victim." Fenris laughed, low and bitter. "You think he's any different? Look at him. He speaks of fate and destiny while claiming you as his prize. Tell me, Seraphina, have you ever truly been free in his shadow?" His words struck deep, awakening the doubts she had buried. But when she looked at Dorian, standing tall beside her, she saw something in his eyes. Not possession, but pain. He wasn't trying to own her. He was trying to protect her the only way he knew how. "Freedom isn't about running from bonds," she said softly, her voice steady. "It's about choosing who you stand with, and I choose him." Fenris's smirk vanished. "Then you've chosen death." In a single motion he lunged forward, his power radiating like a wave of fury. Dorian moved to meet him, the clash of their strength shaking the earth beneath them. The air filled with snarls and growls, the raw sound of wolves fighting for dominance. Seraphina's heart hammered as she watched the two alphas collide, their movements blurs of power and rage. She could feel Dorian's pain through the bond, sharp, burning, relentless. Instinct took over. She ran forward despite the shouts behind her. "Dorian!" she cried, her voice breaking through the chaos. Her words reached him like lightning. In that split second of clarity, Dorian found his strength. With one final surge, he overpowered Fenris, pinning him to the ground. Fenris snarled, his defiance faltering as Dorian's claws hovered dangerously close to his throat. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "She'll never be yours." Dorian's voice was low, steady. "She doesn't have to be mine. She's her own." And with that, he released him. Fenris staggered to his feet, his pride shattered. For the first time, he looked uncertain, small even. He met Seraphina's gaze one last time before turning away into the shadows of the forest. As the silence returned, Seraphina's knees gave way. Dorian caught her before she fell, his arms strong around her. "It's over," he whispered, though his voice trembled with exhaustion. Seraphina closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, she believed him. The dawn after the battle was quiet. Too quiet. The wind carried only the faint rustle of leaves and the distant cries of ravens. The land, once soaked with blood and fury, now lay still beneath the pale light of morning. Seraphina stood on the hill overlooking Dorian's kingdom, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible crown. Behind her, the remnants of Dorian's army were returning home, weary but victorious. The war that had divided the northern clans for generations had finally ended. Fenris's forces had retreated into the shadows, leaderless and broken. Yet, despite the peace that had been won, Seraphina's heart remained heavy. Dorian approached quietly, his footsteps slow but steady. He was no longer the untouchable Alpha King she had once feared. His armor was battered, his hands scarred, and his eyes, though still bright as moonlight, carried exhaustion deeper than she'd ever seen before. "You should be resting," he said softly. "So should you," she replied without turning. "But I suppose kings don't have that luxury." He gave a tired smile. "No, we don't." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the golden light spill across the fields. For the first time there were no shouts, no commands, no battle cries, just the calm that follows survival. It should have felt like victory, but to Seraphina it felt like the end of something much larger. "Fenris is gone," she said quietly. "Truly gone?" Dorian nodded. "His warriors scattered to the wind. Some will join us, others will flee, but his reign is over. The northern lands are united again." "United," she repeated, tasting the word on her tongue, "after so much blood." "Sometimes," Dorian said, "peace demands a price." She turned to him then, studying his face. "And what of your price, Dorian? What did this peace cost you?" His expression softened. "More than I'd ever admit aloud, but less than losing you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind him that she wasn't something to lose or to win. But the sincerity in his tone disarmed her. He wasn't speaking as a king now. He was speaking as the man behind the crown, stripped of power and pride. "I never wanted this crown," he said suddenly, glancing toward the fortress below. "I never asked for the title or the wars that came with it, but when I look at what's left of my people, I realize the kingdom isn't mine. It never was. It belongs to them, to you, to all of us." She frowned slightly. "To me? You stood before both clans and chose peace when no one else would. You faced Fenris without fear. You carry the strength of both sides in you, Seraphina. You were never meant to be a pawn. You were meant to be a bridge." His words struck something deep inside her. For so long she had seen herself as a victim of fate, a woman traded between men and clans. But now, standing beside Dorian, she began to see the truth. She had changed the course of their world, not through battle or blood, but through choice. "I don't know how to be that," she admitted. "A bridge, a queen." Dorian smiled faintly. "Neither did I once. You learn by walking the path, not by fearing it." She hesitated, her heart caught between doubt and hope. "And if I fail?" "Then we fail together," he said simply. She looked up at him, and for the first time there was no wall between them, no titles, no expectations, no fear. Just two souls bound by the same scars, standing on the edge of something new. The sun rose higher, bathing the land in light. In the distance, the fortress bells began to ring, not for war, but for peace. The people were gathering, their voices rising in unison, calling out for their king. But when Dorian turned to go, Seraphina reached out and stopped him. "Not just their king," she said softly. "Their queen, too." He froze, meeting her eyes. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Then come with me," he said, offering his hand. "Let's give them a kingdom worth believing in." She took his hand without hesitation. Together they walked down the hill toward the waiting crowd. Two leaders, no longer divided by destiny but united by choice. And as the people knelt before them, the kingdom of wolves was reborn under a new rule, one forged not in dominance, but in understanding. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, when Seraphina found herself standing at the edge of the castle balcony. The world below seemed peaceful, the soft murmurs of the kingdom drifting upward like whispers carried by the wind. But there was something heavier in the air now. A promise, unspoken yet undeniable, binding her to the man who stood by her side. Dorian joined her, his steps quiet on the stone floor. She didn't look at him, but she felt the weight of his presence as if it had become a part of the very air she breathed. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with the understanding they had both found over the past weeks. They had learned to be more than just rulers, more than just lovers. They were partners, equals in a world that had tried to tear them apart. "You know," Dorian said after a moment, his voice low and thoughtful, "I never thought I'd be standing here like this." Serafina glanced at him, seeing the reflection of the fading light in his eyes. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly, a shadow of something bittersweet crossing his face. "When I first saw you, I thought you were a pawn in a game I could never understand. But you've taught me that power isn't just in strength. It's in the ability to see beyond what's right in front of you." He paused, then added softly, "You've taught me what it means to be human." Serafina's chest tightened at his words, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something that she didn't know how to name. "I didn't ask to be your teacher, Dorian," she said, her voice trembling. "I only wanted to survive." "And you've done more than that," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "You've lived. You've shown me that even in the darkest of times, we have the power to choose who we are, who we want to be. I thought the crown would define me, but it's you who has changed me." She shook her head gently, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "I never wanted to change you. I only wanted to be free." Her voice dropped, quiet and vulnerable. "But now, I wonder if that's enough." Dorian's hand reached out to gently cup her chin, tilting her face toward him. His eyes were steady, filled with both strength and tenderness. "Serafina, we've fought for everything we have, but none of it matters unless we make the choice to stand together. We can keep running, keep hiding, but that won't bring us peace. We need to build it." He paused, his thumb brushing against her skin. "I promise you this. No matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, we'll face it together." Her heart ached with the weight of his promise. She had spent so long feeling like a pawn in a game she didn't understand, like a tool used by others for their gain. But now, standing here with Dorian, she finally realized what it meant to have someone who chose her. Not because of power, but because of love. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she confessed softly, her voice shaking with the uncertainty that had haunted her for so long. "I don't know if I can carry this kingdom with you. I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Dorian whispered, his voice warm and sure. "You've always been strong. You just didn't know it." Serafina closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She could feel the bond between them pulsing gently, like a heartbeat, steady and unwavering. She had never truly understood the mate bond until now. It wasn't just a connection, it was a promise that could never be broken, not by time, not by distance, and certainly not by fear. When she opened her eyes, she met Dorian's gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she was at peace. "I'll stand by you," she said softly, her voice full of conviction. "Not because of the bond, but because I believe in what we can do together." His lips curled into a small, genuine smile. "Then we will rebuild this kingdom, our kingdom, and we will do it right, with love and respect." Serafina nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Together. The world seemed to breathe with them in that moment, the promise of tomorrow carrying them forward into the future they would create, side by side. And as the moon rose high above, casting its silver light over the kingdom they had fought for, Serafina knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it as one. The first light of morning crept across the horizon, spilling over the towers of the newly united kingdom. The air carried a sense of renewal, a soft calm that seemed to whisper of change. Serafina stood at the great hall's balcony, gazing out at the awakening world below. The city was alive with the sound of laughter, of merchants calling to one another, of children running through the streets without fear. For the first time in generations there was peace. Behind her, she heard the steady rhythm of footsteps she had come to recognize in an instant. Dorian's presence filled the room before he spoke. "You've been awake since before dawn again," he said, his tone carrying both amusement and concern. Serafina smiled faintly. "I wanted to see it. The kingdom as it should be. Not in war, not in chains. Just alive. He moved to stand beside her, following her gaze toward the bustling streets. "It's because of you," he said quietly. "They believe in peace because you showed them it's possible." She shook her head softly. "No, Dorian. They believe because they chose to. That's the difference. We gave them the chance to choose." His lips curved into a small smile. "Spoken like a true queen." She turned toward him then, taking in the man she had fought beside, argued with, and ultimately chosen. The bond between them was no longer a mystery. It was steady and familiar, like the heartbeat of the land itself. She could feel his emotions without needing words: pride, love, and the faint flicker of uncertainty that he rarely let anyone see. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" she asked. "Now that the wars are over?" He exhaled, his eyes distant. "Peace isn't an ending, Serafina. It's a beginning, and beginnings are fragile. There will always be those who test it. But this time, we face them together." The certainty in his tone made her chest tighten with warmth. "Together," she repeated softly. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the cry of a hawk in the distance. Dorian reached out, taking her hand in his. "You know," he said, his voice lighter now, "when I first met you, I thought you were the storm that would destroy everything I'd built." She laughed quietly. "And now?" "Now," he said with a small grin, "I know you were the storm that washed everything clean." Serafina looked at him, her heart full. The walls she had built around herself, the ones formed by fear, pain, and doubt, had finally begun to crumble. What remained was something raw, something real. She wasn't the frightened girl who had been sold to a rival clan anymore. She was the woman who had faced kings, defied fate, and rewritten her own destiny. She squeezed his hand. "You've changed too. You're not the man who needed to prove himself through power anymore. You lead because your people trust you, because you trust yourself." Dorian's gaze softened. "Perhaps, but I'll always need you to remind me of that." Their laughter mingled in the quiet morning air. Below, the city's bells began to toll, calling the people to gather in the square. It was the day of renewal, a celebration marking the unity of the clans under one rule. Together they would address their people for the first time as equals, as partners in both power and purpose. Serafina felt a rush of emotion as she looked down at the gathering crowd. "They're waiting for us," she said. Dorian nodded, his expression turning solemn. "Then let's not keep them waiting." He extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. As they stepped out onto the balcony, a wave of cheers rose from below, a sound so powerful it seemed to vibrate through her bones. Dorian raised his hand in acknowledgement, but it was Serafina who spoke first, her voice carrying over the crowd like a song. "This kingdom was not built by kings or queens," she declared. "It was built by the courage of its people, by those who believed that strength comes not from bloodlines, but from unity." The cheers grew louder, and she glanced at Dorian. His smile told her everything words could not. For the first time, Serafina felt whole. The battles, the pain, the choices, they had all led here to this moment, a new beginning. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky gold, she whispered to him, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Dorian leaned closer, his voice warm against her ear. "And it's only the beginning."